The dog zombie tugged at the hem of Kino's dress. Kino seemed to understand its meaning and jogged behind the dog zombie as it led the way. After finally emerging from hiding, Suzuki Satoru could see Kino as the dog zombie brought her over. However, he could not relax yet. Undead beings with high-level thief skills were not common, but they still existed. Someone like that might launch a sneak attack. Satoru-sama, you're safe. It had been far beyond the appointed time, and she was probably very worried. Kino looked overjoyed, but now was not the time to be happy. Come here. Suzuki Satoru leapt out and took Kino's hand. There was no time to explain everything to Kino, his eyes were wide. Suzuki Satoru immediately cast greater teleportation, taking Kino and the dog zombie to their sewer base. He checked his surroundings after arriving, paying particular attention to the entrance. There was no sign the door had been opened. The eyeball corpse floating in the air had not been damaged either. He could be sure that it was safe. Were you? It was only when he returned here that Suzuki Satoru allowed himself to breathe a sigh of relief. After that, he remembered that he had to explain things to Kino. After dismissing the dog zombie and picking up the cash item, Suzuki Satoru began his explanation. The main points were that he had wiped out the undead being Kino had been talking about, but the enemy was far too weak, so it was possible that it might have been a body double or something similar. Thus, he had chosen to withdraw. No, I don't think that's the case. Don't you think you defeated it so easily because you're such a powerful magic caster, Satoru-sama? If it had been an overlord like me, then surely it would not have gone down so easily. The difference between my strength and the enemy's is too great, so all I could tell was that it was very powerful. Could that be possible? I considered that too. In that case, I'll go check by myself again. It was very dangerous, but it was also the only way. Suzuki Satoru could sense the presence of the undead, but he could not sense their strength. Therefore, he had no choice but to evaluate them with his own eyes. Thank you very much. The search might take 1 or 2 hours, so you'll need to wait here. After ordering the eyeball corpse to protect Kino, Suzuki Satoru teleported to the noble estate again. He observed the interior of the castle from there, but there was no commotion or any sign that the alert level had been increased. He conjured a powerful undead being with summon undead 10th and sent it into the castle. However, no battle ensued. Thus, Suzuki Satoru steeled his resolve and followed closely behind it. He retraced the dog zombie's path to the throne room. On his way there, he did not encounter any other undead besides zombies. The door to the throne room remained open. The robe and gear of the undead being he had wiped out earlier were scattered on the ground. No way, don't tell me he was really too weak. Ah, this is bad, I made a mistake. Perhaps that really was a body double, and the real thing fled immediately once he realized he couldn't beat me. That's certainly possible. If I'd known this back then, would things have been better if I had opened with Dimensional Lock or some other battlefield control spell instead of attack magic? I made a bad move, he lamented as he directed the undead being beside him into the room. There were no undead reactions from inside, but he could not eliminate the possibility that there were guards inside who were not undead. After seeing that his minion had not been attacked, Suzuki Satoru stepped in front of the room and peeked inside. Of the many tables inside, a lot of them had been moved over from other rooms. They were stacked with books, until they formed a heaping pile. Parchments and rough papers were strewn all over the ground, and they were filled with characters that Suzuki Satoru did not recognize. It looked like the room of a scholar, or a bureaucrat who dealt heavily in paperwork. The information's all here, but there's nobody around. Suzuki Satoru took all the items on the ground into his inventory. While he wanted to investigate them right away, he ought to keep being on the lookout for powerful undead as his top priority. Suzuki Satoru pretty much turned the interior of the castle upside down. 2 hours later, he folded his arms and began to think. I can't find him anywhere. He's fled. No, I doubt it. Escaping by himself would be one thing, but it would be impossible to flee with all his minions under my watch. More importantly, he left all these document-like things here. In addition, there were no signs that any other rooms were used. Basically, I can conclude that the opposition was too weak. Suzuki Satoru fumed over all the time and brain cells he had wasted. One could say that this was a failure brought about by fighting without making appropriate backup plans ahead of time. If Minato-san heard about this, he'd nag me all day long about things went so well, simply because you were lucky, etc. In truth, he might have been worse off if the enemy had not been so weak. This place was different from the game. Perhaps he only had one life after all. He did not know how the resurrection mechanics worked, and therefore, he needed to take better care of himself. After reaffirming his thoughts, Suzuki Satoru set off to where Kino was. Ha, the zombies are still zombies, as I thought returning them to normal isn't that easy. Still, that's why this was such a priority, but when you get down to it, can you really restore them? Suzuki Satoru took the wand he had picked up just now from his inventory. He looked it over, then put it away and cast his teleportation spell. Suzuki Satoru returned to the castle with Kino in tow. This time, he was planning to search the interior more carefully. He lent Kino an item that could cast fly, and the two of them used fly to look around the inside of the castle. All Kino did was to see if there was anything different about the castle, compared to when she had lived in it. Even so, checking such a huge castle took quite a lot of time. In the end, they had not turned up anything special. Kino had locked her parents in her mother's room. While they were still undead, they were also still intact. It would seem that undead being had not been interested in anything other than turning the throne room into a research lab. And so they returned to the sewer for the time being. After Kino's mana recovered, they cast fly again and headed to the throne room for more in-depth investigations. The sun set, and night slowly descended upon the land. The throne room was divided into 3 rooms. The one adjoining the door was piled high with books, the second was heaped with treasures gathered from throughout the city, and the final room was the undead being's lab. It contained some mysterious fluids and a stench that would not go away. After seeking Kino's opinion on the matter, Suzuki Satori decided to put all the items into his inventory, since it did not exceed his weight capacity, and then he moved them into a random room. Kino had originally wanted to go back to her own chambers, but Suzuki Satori shot that idea down. If they were going to do that, they would not have needed to use fly while conducting their investigations. After that, they decided to move on to the room once used by the maids. When Suzuki Satori had first explored it, both he and his minion had prepared to move into the room, but instead they had gotten a face full of white dust. It was less dusty now, though. There's so much dust. Suzuki Satori had been mentally prepared for this, and all he could do was shrug at Kino's lamentation. Well, it's been a long time since someone lived here. The floor was thick with dust, which indicated that nobody had set foot in here for a long time. Therefore, the two of them did not dwell on it after giving it a once-over. Kino was the first one into the room. She went through it and opened the window. The wind that rushed in threw up a great deal of dust. If there were any living creatures present who needed to breathe, they would probably have been coughing by now. However, both of them were undead, who had no such need, and the most that the clouds of dust could do was mildly annoy them. May I clean up this room? You don't need to ask my permission for that, Suzuki Satori thought, and then he answered. I don't mind. However, what do you think of cleaning up the dust this way? Suzuki Satori took out a scroll. As a compulsive hoarder, he was the sort of person who did not use consumable items lightly. However, this was just a low-level item, and he had many superior substitutes for it, so it did not matter to him. The scroll contained a summon monster first spell. It could summon a low-level lesser air elemental. There was no need to speak to it, it was as though it had a mental link to the caster, who could give orders with a mental impulse. The air elemental began spinning, and it swiftly blew the dust within the room outside. Kino-san, this scroll contains the same kind of spell. Why don't you try summoning a water elemental with it? Suzuki Satori handed the scroll to her, and Kino cast the spell, summoning a lesser water elemental, as he had said. Thank you, Satori-sama. There's no need to stand on ceremony. Don't take it to heart. Elementals summoned by first-tier scrolls only exist for a short time. Please keep your priorities in mind when cleaning the room. Alright. Also, you can dispel the fly spell now. Got it. Although there had been no great changes in the situation, perhaps being able to regain her home made Kino visibly happier, and she nodded. As he observed the marked change in Kino, Suzuki Satori contemplated it with a calmness that surprised even himself. He had given Kino the scroll for a reason. While he had conducted many tests after coming to this world, this was the first time he had actually used a consumable item like a scroll. I see, so Yggdrasil scrolls can be used by the inhabitants of this world. Then what about the other way around? I'd like to test that out too. Also, the elementals summoned by the scroll are very short-lived, she didn't seem to find anything wrong with that. So my knowledge of scrolls in Yggdrasil is also applicable to this world, am I right? While he had asked Kino about things like that before, he had his proof now. It was not that he did not trust her, but seeing was believing, after all. As he had said, the two elementals soon vanished, but by that time the room was already quite clean. Where shall we look next? I wanted to start from this bundle of parchments. Why had that undead creature come here? Who was that undead being? What lay behind all this? And most importantly, was there really a way to restore the people who had been turned into zombies? It was those questions in her heart which drove her, giving her the faint hope that she could find the answer within those parchments, which was why she wanted to start with them. Just as Kino was about to open up those rolled-up parchments that reeked of a foreboding odor, Suzuki Satori stopped her. Is something the matter, Satori-sama? Allow me to remind you, but have you checked if they contain traps? Is it possible that they contain some sort of magical trap? Some traps are disguised as scrolls. When people try to use them, they explode, and so on. Do such things exist? Ha, you mean they don't? The two of them looked at each other. Satori-sama, do you have a solution? I'm not good at disarming traps. I think it would be best to let one of my created undead open it. Saying so, Suzuki Satoru created a Death Knight. He had the Death Knight go outside the room and open it from a distance. However, the problem was that ordinary parchment would also burn in the event of an explosion, so he had to take each piece out individually to check if they were safe. After repeating the process with all the parchments, they moved on to the books. While the Death Knight repeated a road action, Kino was also checking the parchments that had been declared safe. However, Kino's face froze. I'm sorry, Satoru-sama. I don't understand these words. Ah. He had heard before that many languages existed in this world. Suzuki Satoru stood behind Kino and looked at the parchments. Wow, I can't believe it's in Japanese, but such wishful thinking was not to be. In that case, Suzuki Satoru took a monocle out of his inventory. I'll lend this to you. This item should allow you to translate languages. Suzuki Satoru did not use it himself because he felt that he would not be able to understand the contents of the research.